We have a couple presentations this evening. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council. Our first item tonight is a presentation on the city's open finance transparency site. If you'll recall, a couple of weeks ago, I believe it was Councilmember Stewart had mentioned having the ability to drill down further into some of our city expenditures and being able to look at those in more detail. Of course, financial transparency has been a goal of the council for some time now, and this has been an initiative of our finance department for a while. So tonight, our Deputy Director of Finance, Cindy Gray, is here to give you and the community a little bit of a tutorial on this new tool and show everybody how it can be accessed and utilized for the benefit of the public. So without further ado, I will ask Ms. Gray to come forward and give you that overview.
Good evening, Council. I'm Cindy Gray, CFO, Deputy Finance Director. As Zach mentioned, transparency has been an ongoing request from Council, and with Munis, that is one of the options that we have taken. And so it is my pleasure to show you a little bit of what it can do. This is just a brief overview of what it can do. We are still tweaking it, and it should go live here in January. So we'll just go ahead and get started. So Open Finance is a portal that users can view from their desktops, their phones, their smartphones, their laptops, their tablets. They can access this anywhere. It's easy to use. It's like a Google type interface. It provides budget data. It provides actual expenditures. It provides payroll data. It goes through all the main categories that, like your checkbook. So if you want to go see what you wrote last week, you can go into your checkbook and see your expenditures. The graphics are really nice and easy to use. There are pie charts, there's graphs, there's the budget data, and then the actual data is within that graph. So it's very intuitive. It's real time, so every day it's refreshed every day, so it's in a real time type mode. It's also very cost efficient, as this is part of our Munis that we had purchased, and it uses our data, financial data, and so there's no really support from IT that needs to take place. It's very minimal. All is done through the cloud, through our SaaS-based maintenance program. So this is our opening screen for the Open Finance. And as you'll see, we have the City of Independence. We have some tabs across the top. We have budget, checkbook, and a payroll, of which you can access any of these items from above. You also have search features, common questions. As you scroll down, if I can scroll down, there is the financial summary. These are really easy and quick for you to get to what you want to look for. If you're looking for revenue, if you're looking for expenditures, if you're looking for a payroll, or if you're just looking at vendors, wanting to see what kind of vendors and what vendors have that we use and what we pay. And then you also have top budget categories. So this is, again, it's just an overview. Very quick and fast and easy to get to. You can tab over and hit different items that you may be interested in. And of course, you can drill down in each one of these. The other nice thing on the main page is if you go to the very bottom, you can also go back to the City of Independence webpage. You can also click on and go to the adopted budget. And you can also go to any of the financial reports, which is located within the finance department. So we're going to go through a couple just quick things. We're going to start on here. We can go into Explore, or we can also go up here to the budget. So I'm going to click on Explore, and we're going to go look at our revenue budget. So in our revenue, all of these items have different search features. So one of the things, you can search by fund or by category or a subcategory. I'm going to click on general fund. And you'll see then it will break down the revenue by these types of funds. You can also turn it into a graphic and make it a nice pie chart. At the bottom of the page, we have different details. It will give you all the different types at the bottom listed with the revised budget as well as the actual and the percent that's available, or percent used, excuse me. We can also go to the budget up in the ribbon and go to operating. So within the operating, again, you can, it works pretty much the same on all the sheets, all the slide. Again, we can go into the general fund. You can break it down by a department. So we could go into fire. And you could go into FD operations. You can go into the divisions. And then within the divisions, you have the different categories, the personnel, you have other services, supplies. We go into supplies, it will then break it down based on the different supplies that are listed under that category. And again, we have the option to go to a pie chart. Also on the left-hand side, at any time, you can click and go levels up and start at a different place. You can always go to the drop-down and also go by category and subcategories. I'm going to click over to our checkbook and explore the spending. It'll come up and show our vendors, and it starts with the one that has the most, that we spend the most with. And as you can see here, we have UMB Bank, the IRS, and you can also click on each one of any of these. And you can see which department or which fund uses the most in this category. Go into the general fund. And the IRS, we pay FICA and federal income tax. And then you can also drill down farther, and you can get all of the vendor payments and the dates and the amounts that were paid. Now, this will go back only till this current fiscal year, which is July. So when you look at this, you'll see it only go back to July. Now, you can go back several years as an option. And then we have our payroll. And payroll is broken down first by fund, and then you can also break it down by organization and department. So if we go by department, these would be all the different departments, and you can see which department is spending the most. If you need, there's more departments, so you have the next button that will go to the next page for the next grouping. We go back to fund. We can go into the general fund, and then within the general fund, you can see your departments as well. You can also go in to choose one of the departments, and you can do a drill down. So for fire, you have the operations, prevention, administration, and you can see by which divisions how much is being spent. Scroll down and there's more details at the bottom, and you can see how much is being paid on base pay, overtime pay, other pay, as well as the employer paid benefits. And then you have your total. This is just the quick view of what you can do. There's a lot of drill down options in every single screen, but I just wanted to kind of give you a quick overview as we're going through this so that you have an idea of what you're going to be able to see once it goes live here in January. You have any questions?
I do.
Okay.
You said that this is real-time data, so where are we pulling this from?
From our financials.
From our financials? And do we know how secure that is? I mean, does it take long to find a backdoor opening into that? And
Sure.
if they get into that, and you say we're pulling from our financials, what data are we exposing?
So this is going through the SaaS-based system, and they are using a program. So the security is set really high with the Tyler Technologies, and with the actual data resides with them. So they use what they call the platform. It's called FedRAMP Moderate, which is an accredited program that governments use, is what I have been told. So from what I'm understanding, it is very secure. Everything is being held on their servers, not our servers. So if we were to get an attack, it would not be compromised.
But, so they'd have to get into their,
Right.
have they had any issues, do we know?
They've had very minor issues, but nothing like what we've had.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Comments?
Is there any expenditures that wouldn't be put in there? Is there any type of expenditures that wouldn't be put in there for any reason?
The only expenditures that you wouldn't see would be personal type expenditures, like in employees, data that they're withholding, certain withholdings that are more of a personal nature. Those would be the only things that would, and those would be in a category of other. They would not be you would not be able to drill down to see the detail of those.
Okay, thank you.
Just one more thing. So on the payroll side of it, no employees of our city, their information's gonna be accessible?
Nope.
There's no way to backdoor from that information into ours and expose any of their information?
No. That part is, we are very confident in that part of it, because that is very sensitive data. So, no, that will not be, information on employees, personal information is not available through this.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to our second presentation. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council, I'll go ahead and ask Tom Scannell to get up here and introduce this one so we can keep it moving. A lot of good information coming here.
Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council, my name is Tom Scannell. I'm the Community Development Director. If you will recall, earlier this year, the city issued a RFP looking for a consultant to complete a citywide housing study. Back in July of this year, Development Strategies was the consultant who was selected to complete that. Tonight, I have Justin Carney and Andy Pfister. Both of them are with Development Strategies. They will be giving a presentation and an overview of the housing study that they have completed.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and city councilors. It's good to see you all again, and we appreciate the opportunity to share some of our key findings from this study. We're going to present quite a bit of information and go quickly. We are happy to come back to slides and discuss anything when we are done. We'd like to start this conversation about talking about the importance of housing. We sometimes say it impacts everything or touches everything because we know from a large body of research that safe and decent, stable housing enhances neighborhood stability. It can reduce crime. It improves educational performance for students and for schools. It reduces mental and physical health impacts of poor quality housing. It supports jobs, improves job performance, and can enhance the overall appeal of a community. And so with that in mind, housing is very important for the stability of independence and for the city to meet its goals moving forward. I want to quickly review the goals of the study. We wanted to understand what the housing barriers and needs are. what's the market for all types of housing? Market rate, affordable. What does quality housing mean? You know, we want to understand the neighborhood context and dynamics in the different communities within Independence, and also recommend strategy ideas for the city to deliberate on in the future and decide what its priorities are. We also want to ask you to keep in mind that there are no silver bullets. There's no one program to solve some of the housing challenges you all are facing. It takes a lot of different approaches and a lot of different systems moving together. The city has housing challenges. We all know that, and that's why we're here. But you've already begun the work of addressing them, whether it's through some of the landlord programs, through your neighborhood investments in infrastructure and other things. And overall, there's a need. We've come to the conclusion that there's a need to engage the community across the board to understand what their different needs and challenges are. It's probably no surprise to improve the quality of the existing stock, kind of increase the community's overall commitment to housing stability. And then also we heard a lot about challenging perceptions of the city that might be holding it back compared to its competitors. And so what we want to talk about is a kind of a headline review, key conclusions from the data analysis. I want to talk about what we heard when we talked to various stakeholders across the community. There's also a community-wide survey that provided some more additional insight into what some of the challenges are here. I'm going to talk through market analysis and where we see demand for housing, both today and in the future. We'll walk through that neighborhood analysis that I mentioned, and then kind of end with those strategic ideas of what can we do about these challenges and move Independence forward. That Justin's going to give an overview of some of the data analysis and what we heard from our conversations.
Thank you. Good evening. So I'm just going to run through some of the highlights of the data analysis that we conducted. One of the first things that we looked at was just simply how is the city growing? And we find that the city is growing, but at a much slower rate than the rest of the region. I do want to highlight on this slide here, we had originally used American ACS data, American Community Survey data, indicating that the city had grown by about 2,500 people. While we were in the middle of this data analysis, or towards the end of our analysis, the decennial census data came out and actually showed that the city had grown by over 6,000 people. So actually a fair bit more growth, I think, than we had originally saw, around 2%, but still less than the city, or less than the region. And while there's a lot of different factors that come into that play of why it may not be capturing the regional share, from a housing perspective, we might start asking questions like, do we have the right kind of housing stock? Do we have the right kind of amenities? Housing at the right price and at the right location to attract and retain population here in the city? And so just a few of some of the questions that come to mind from this early data point. We also like to start off our analysis really understanding what does affordability mean from the perspective of the city and the region. HUD produces a statistic, a fair market rent of what does it take for a safe, decent, quality two-bedroom unit in the metropolitan area. As you can see here, it's just over $1,000, including utilities. So you translate that as what does that mean from an affordability standpoint? Well, what that means is that a household needs to make an hourly wage of $21 an hour in order to barely afford, or to afford the bare minimum of this rent and utilities, and to not be cost burdened. You may have heard of cost burdened. We'll probably talk about it a couple of times. If a household is spending more than 30% of its income on housing, it is cost burdened. So a household needs to earn $21 an hour to afford this two-bedroom fair market rent in order to not be cost burdened. Which leads us to the next point, which is that a considerable percentage of residents in Independence, households in Independence, cannot afford that rent without being cost burdened. As you can see here, 43% do not make that $21 an hour to afford that two-bedroom of quality and decent housing. We like to slice that statistic a little bit more from an equity standpoint. As you can see here, that 43 is a citywide average. You can see that just over half of our Hispanic households are not able to afford that rent, and almost 60% of African American households in the city are not able to afford that 2-bedroom unit. We start to look at the economics of kind of the intersection of what does it take then, or what is the trajectory of the city and the region for the jobs that are coming in to be able to afford that. And looking at projected job growth and wage growth, 40% of the new jobs will pay less than $35,000 a year. Well, what does that translate into if you're not cost burdened again in that affordability range? You're talking about $880 for rent and utilities. You're talking about a homeowner payment, a mortgage priced, a home priced up to $160,000. Another 30% of the jobs requiring a high school diploma will earn between $35,000 to $75,000. So what does that translate into? Again, in an affordability range. You start seeing rents go from that $880 up to $1,880. You see home prices from $160,000 to $340,000. And you start to think about, do we have the housing stock that is going to be able to accommodate the employees that are making these wages as the economy progresses? We also look at the demographics. And Independence actually exhibits some unique characteristics when you compare the city to the rest of the region. It has a smaller household size. The median age is older, and the family households are less. And by family households, by non-family households, we might be talking about people that live by themselves or non-related people living together. And when you start to look at these demographics, smaller household size, older households, non-family households, you start to, again, kind of ask questions from a housing perspective. Do we have the housing stock that accommodates these changing demographics? So that's the people side. We also look at the housing stock that currently exists. And we look at things like, when was the housing built? Where are vacant units? What is the median home value? And you can start to see some patterns here geographically. You have older housing stock with more vacancies and lower home values in the northwest portion of the city. And you see new construction being predominantly focused on the eastern side of the city. And you start to think about geographically, what does this mean from a development pattern? Where might you see different housing types and lead to different strategies? So all of this is really kind of forming that analytical understanding that we have of the city and the housing stock and the people that are here and that might be here. We also wanted to get more of that experience and having conversations with all of you, with various stakeholders, and then the community-wide survey. So I'm going to go quickly through some of the analysis or some of the things that we heard from the community survey and our stakeholder meetings. With the community survey results, we asked a question. Have you found it challenging to find suitable housing in Independence? And just over half of our respondents said that yes, they had, and their primary reasons were housing costs, utility costs, again, that ability to afford the housing that they're currently in or to find housing that they can afford. Just over 62% of our respondents said that they face physical or structural issues with the home that they live in now and that they need help for. You can see there the preponderance of those responses are maintenance and repairs, weatherization, energy efficiency, and accessibility issues. And as you start to slice some of that down, you can start to, some of our data is telling us that the respondents here, a considerable portion of the respondents were older retirees who were having issues maintaining their homes or wanting to stay in their homes from accessibility standpoint. Fortunately, just 30% said that they have health and safety related issues with their homes, and you can see here fire alarms, pest control, mold removal, small percentages of those that responded to that. That's just some of the quantitative results that came out of our survey. We also had open-ended questions that allowed people to kind of share their experience with us, and really kind of more of the same of affordability, having housing that is marketable to professionals and to retirees, and having amenities that changing populations would want to have. But I think interesting here was also there were several comments that were focused on the neighborhood amenities, the neighborhood qualities, the ability to have walkable neighborhoods and having different amenities like sidewalks and trails, and to be near restaurants and entertainment and shopping, kind of not necessarily specifically related to their homes, but certainly related to their neighborhoods and where they were in the community. And then there were several comments around senior citizen assistance and aging in place, and the ability to remain in their homes, or at the very least remain in their community. So that was sort of the qualitative experiential comments that we got from the survey. Just want to highlight a few of the conversations that we had here from our stakeholder conversations. We were talking to realtors, developers, advocacy groups, social service providers, and we had conversations with many of you. And similar comments about the affordability, about amenities and marketability of the homes, but a couple of things here that I think are unique to the conversations we had with stakeholders. The one here in the middle, many mom and pop landlords are aging out and selling their portfolios. And so what's happening there is a couple of things. You're losing that local personal connection of the landlords that currently exist, and that goes hand in hand with the influx of corporate ownership of rental properties. And that as they're selling their portfolios, these corporate real estate entities are coming in and buying them, and then we're having kind of this preponderance of out-of-state, out-of-community ownership of rental. And it's impacting the ability to maintain that affordable rental single-family property, and there's some real implications there. Again, you're looking at the ability to have new housing stock, and where is it, and do we have the market for it? I think there were some questions of that early on. And then also some comments about how do we maintain the existing stock that we have, because it is affordable. It may not be marketable, it may not have some of the same amenities, but it's certainly on that affordable side, and how do we maintain that existing housing stock? And so those were some of the big themes that came out of the stakeholder meetings and out of the community survey and the data, and it just really sort of sets the foundation for what we understand to be the housing needs. I'm not going to read this to you, certainly, but it's new housing, it's maintaining the existing stock. Where does that new housing go? Is it greenfield development? Is it infill development? How do we have the right housing stock to promote aging in place, again, of helping seniors maintain the homes that they might be in, or providing them with options that they can move into without leaving independence. And homelessness also came up, I think, from the stakeholder meetings as well, and is one of the themes that came out of what we heard. So you'll see these housing goals here. I'm not going to go into the right-hand column because you'll see them again as we get into the strategic framework, but I think that's a real quick overview of some of the data and community conversations that we had. And now Andy's going to walk us through the market analytics.
So once we got a handle of the existing conditions through talking to a lot of people and looking in depth at a lot of different data sources, we did some market analysis where we compare supply and demand to start to quantify what's needed at what price points in the market. So we looked at multifamily market performance and didn't really see any stories here. It's performing pretty well relative to the county. Some of the new product, although it's not fully open, is leasing up at their anticipated rates so far. We looked at the supply of affordable housing, which when we say subsidized affordable units here or dedicated affordable units, we mean projects that are, by land use restriction, have an affordability period through public housing, through Section 8 vouchers and project-based Section 8, and also through low-income housing tax credits. We compared it to households who qualify for affordable housing based on their income, which would be up to 60% of the area median income. And there's nearly 20,000 households who qualify and just under 5,000 dedicated affordable units. So there's a lot of competition for these units, and a lot of households are finding housing on the open market. Now, a lot of these households, a lot of these 20,000 or 15,000 who aren't in the dedicated affordable units are finding perfectly decent housing that meets their needs in the community. Others are choosing to be cost burdened out of necessity, not really choosing. Some are choosing lower quality housing that they can afford, but may have condition issues that create health challenges or other challenges. And so there is a need to continue to meet this affordable housing demand and improve the quality of what we have today. We also looked at the single-family market. We heard a lot about how, like nationally, like regionally, it's very tight in independence, and the data from MLS does confirm that story. In the upper left, it's same for you. The graph, the yellow line shows the average days on the market, or average days to sell. And it's down to under 20 days on market, which is very, very, very quick historically. And the average sales price has increased every year by quite a bit over the last 5 years. In the lower right, we mapped the price appreciation over the last 5 years, and even in the most affordable zip code in Northwest Independence, the median sales price increased by 110% in the last 5 years. So even for households who could, where Independence has been affordable for generations, there's starting to be some pressure, and some of that is because of limited supply on the market, and some of it is competition with the national companies buying up rental housing. Another interesting trend, we heard that the new builds have not kept pace after the Great Recession, that a lot of the development didn't come back. And the permitting activity does confirm that. And while regionally that has been the case, it is particularly, Independence is lagging behind its neighbors of Lee Summit and Blue Springs in terms of permit activity despite being larger. And the drop comparing the last decade with the 2000s is even greater in Independence. And so some of the questions you asked us to ask is why? And so that is a challenge, and how do we bring back some of that new construction to continue to meet future demand? And so what are those future needs, and how can we start to ask that question of how do we meet them here in Independence? We look at demand through a number of different ways. There's no one formula to calculate it. Our conversations with you and stakeholders informed it for sure. We look at what current residents can afford. We look at says potential residents or target markets who aren't currently in Independence or aren't in number compared to your market area or the county or the region. And we look at migration and see patterns of people moving around the area. And then we just compare to other cities to see how you stack up and how you're doing. And when we look at housing affordability based on income, when we look at for sale, and this may not be too surprising, but a lot of households can afford that moderately priced home that we heard a lot about, $150,000 to $250,000. I think a little bit of a surprise is the number of households who could afford a higher priced home if they wanted. So then we compared current supply to demand. So the turquoise number is that household affordability from the prior slide. And the blue, the darker blue, compares it to the current supply and current median housing prices. And what we found was 50% of the city supply is priced $150,000 or below, but the challenge there is the quality of home. And then we saw that just based on comparing what people could afford to what's available, there's potentially unmet demand in the higher income categories where we heard there is a desire to get more new construction. And one caveat there that's important is just because you can afford one of these higher priced homes doesn't mean a lot of households choose to. So a lot of those households are probably in that more moderate income price range today, but may be staying in that home because they want to stay in Independence, but don't have the option that they want here. When looking at rental affordability, nearly 2/3 of households can afford a rent of $1,200 or below. This is including utilities. And, I think a little bit of a surprise compared to what we heard is that higher rent category above $1,200 to about $2,000. It's about a quarter of likely renter households can afford that. So that's part of why you're seeing those newer developments come here. Then when you compare it to supply and demand, again, there appears to be an oversupply in the lower and more affordable income range below 1,000 rent, which is this category here. And what happens there is there's competition for the quality units in that price range because there's not much in the last 20 years. There hasn't been as much built that is higher priced. So there appears to be unmet demand for that moderate, about $1,000 a month to higher rent based on this analysis. We also looked at it's called market segmentation or Tapestry Groups. This data is provided by our data provider, Esri, and what they do is combine a lot of socioeconomic data, consumer preferences, consumer spending to create these target markets. These categories are their titles and their definitions, but what we looked at was who lives in the region who's not living here who might want to because of Independence's assets like the good performing schools. This particular group is family landscapes and includes these different categories here. They're primarily homeowner, have children, young children, etc. And when we map where these households are located, you can see there's a lot in Jackson County, but not as many within Independence. And so if we have the right kind of housing and right kind of environment, it is conceivable that these households could be attracted to Independence because it's not likely that their commute time would change much. And this is within the price range we've been talking about for moderate income housing demand. And so if we captured just a portion of these households, family landscapes is in the middle here. We also looked at a couple other categories that are more common in the county than in Independence. If we captured just 3% of these households, that would be demand for about 1,000 units, primarily for sale, and that $250,000 to $350,000 price range that we heard just aren't available in mass here today. We also looked at senior housing demand because that is the largest growing portion of your population. A couple interesting facts about that is, you remember I talked about 20,000 households who, based on their income, need some sort of affordable housing. Nearly 60% of those households are seniors, meaning they're 65 or older. So there's a need for affordable senior housing, whether it's efforts to keep people in their homes that they own and their income's low because fixed income, Social Security, or retirement, or new options that are suitable, such as apartments or villas. And so what does that mean overall? There's a lot of work and information behind this chart, and part of the handout we gave you earlier is to kind of summarize this into different categories a little more clearly, and the report will do this as well. But basically, over a more conservative approach over the next 20 years, we believe there will be demand for nearly 5,000 new units. About 65% of those will be for sale, and over 2,000 for rent. Consistent with a lot of the data you saw and what we talked about, there will continue to be strong demand for affordable units, but also substantial demand for those moderately priced homes and even higher priced homes. Where demand becomes more limited is the super high-end, very high-end apartments, rental options, because there's not as strong demand for that. And one point on this is it will not be all new construction. One of the things we factored in and looked at was, so what if we bring our housing vacancy down? And so some of this demand, particularly in the moderately priced homes, can be met by repurposing and renovating existing homes and helping improve the quality of those homes in the neighborhoods. And on that note, we did what we call neighborhood cycle analysis, where we create 4 categories of neighborhood that tell us different characteristics. What we did in GIS was layer 12 different economic, demographic, and physical condition categories for housing to create this composite where we have neighborhoods that need a lot of help and neighborhoods that are stable where the market is really taking care of things. And so gray are the neighborhoods that need a long-term commitment to improve condition and outcomes for households, and the more, purple up there. Purple are those that are growing and don't need much intervention. I wanted to highlight a few different observations here. Some of this map is surprising based on what we heard when we talked to various people in the community, particularly that Fairmount in the northwest is green instead of gray, meaning maybe there's some signs of reinvestment there that can be further leveraged to stabilize the area more. And we know there's a lot of challenges there still. Also down here where it says Rockwood and Rock Creek, there's a solid blue area of strength that can continue to be built upon, as efforts continue there, as we know are underway now. We were also surprised by the amount of gray and the concentration of challenges around the square. It's called the Heart of Independence here because that's the subdivision name when it was originally platted. This is an area that's seen a lot of investment. It's a neighborhood that can offer a walkable environment as a housing stock that, some of it is probably very challenged and might need to be demolished, but a lot could be renovated over time and create that walkable environment that a certain segment of our population continues to like across the country. So you have the bones here for that, and there's work to do to continue to promote that over time and stabilize that area. Then we heard a bit about the perception of independence and gateways. What do you think of independence when you drive into the city? Just down here, this is an area with a lot of strength around it. I know there's varying conditions based on the quadrant and different things going on there, but think about those things of strength of how we can improve people's first visual experience as we move into or drive into the city. And so this is just a diagram to show that flow from moving from, we call them opportunity neighborhoods to growing neighborhoods. You have to think of it as a long-term commitment, a 20-year commitment of resources to catalyze and investment from the private market. And eventually, what we see in communities across the country is, over time, those public investments pay off and the private market takes over. And investments in people and helping people stabilize their household situation are important along the way. So with that, thinking about these housing needs and the housing goals that we heard throughout the course of this process and the conversations we had, we boiled it down to these five items. We think it's very important to improve the quality and condition of the existing housing stock. Improve what you have will strengthen the core of the city, the historic core. Also being more proactive about new development. We'll talk a little bit about what that means in a second. Be intentional about engaging the community. One of the biggest lessons we learned from the survey, where we, Culture Journey helped translate the survey and do some outreach to get participation from the Hispanic community and immigrant community that we understand is growing and is investing in housing in their neighborhoods, did not participate in the survey relative to the proportion of households they are in the city. So building that trust and connecting that community with the resources available today could leverage their interest in investing in their homes and starting businesses in the community. We heard a lot about homelessness and the challenge of seeing homelessness visibly in the city. So addressing homelessness and housing stability for the neediest residents is important. And also, we heard a lot about the perception of the city, both internally and externally, and that's something we think the city can work on. So there's a lot of different ways you can approach this, and this strategic framework is initial ideas of what we've seen as best practices in other communities we work in and the research we do across the country. So about improving the quality and condition of the existing housing stock, that's aligning public investments with home repair activities and demolition activities to maximize the impact in a small area. Partnering with organizations to support aging in place, keeping seniors in the homes who want to stay there. Continuing to work with landlords, which is another long-term commitment to improve the condition of rental housing, and continuing code enforcement activities. We listed at the bottom here, establish an affordable housing fund or a housing rehab fund. We're working in communities, including Tulsa and Wichita, as they roll out those programs today to provide more flexible resources to current residents to kind of just do those repairs that are challenging them in their house today. Being proactive about new development is helping developers see the opportunity. It might be mapping and keeping a database of existing platted lots that are ready for development with contact information, identify locations where there's ongoing investment that could be good locations for infill or subdivision development. Market these housing opportunities with, as the Chamber and Housing Builders Association and Realtors Association continue to do work here. And being intentional about engaging the community, hosting regular public forums and focus groups to make sure you're understanding the community's needs, facilitating meetings with translation services, kind of have a regular plan to engage the community and continue to ensure that outreach is done as part of the whole rollout of any housing efforts you do. Addressing homelessness, and overall housing stability. Sometimes it's about expanding supports to prevent eviction and helping, people who just need a little help to stay in a stable housing situation. We heard there's not really a lot of shelter opportunities, and there's not permanent supportive housing that help transition homeless individuals and households to a more stable life. Continue to promote housing stability, supporting aging in place. And again, these are some tools we see implemented in other communities that when they work together, they can really improve the housing stability challenge. And changing the perception of the city. This is telling Independence's story, telling everybody that the schools are good and that there's a certain kind of housing available here. It's building upon the branding campaign that was finished a few years ago, marketing those development opportunities, just creating a more welcoming environment. And those are just an overview of some of the ideas we've put forth that would need further discussion to determine what the priorities are and what makes sense for Independence. As far as the next steps for our study, we submitted a 80% complete draft report, which we understand you have. We're continuing to refine it and finish that up by next Wednesday. And I understand this will be submitted for approval on January 3rd session. With that, we're happy to discuss any questions or comments you might have.
I have some questions.
Go ahead.
Yeah, appreciate the work and the time you've put into this. It's one of the better housing studies I think I've seen in a while. The real question is, now that we're trying to bring some formality and adapt it to our long-range goals, you said it takes about 20 years. It's going to require some effort on our part, obviously. Will you be giving us any type of strategic steps along the way that, because there's certain things here that I'm challenged by, and it's not because of you. In fact, I'm grateful that you bring these forward, because it really strikes at the heart of what we talk about, but we kind of do it in a shotgun effect. And I think that, you know, if you just read through and just go through what you've shown us, I think we have a shotgun effect. I mean, what this shows. The question that I have is, you know, when you had the big divide in our city, the east and the west, you know, I wonder how much political will we'll have, you know, to strategically move money from older areas or to older areas, from more developed areas. That's one thing. Will you address any of that in your final report? The strategic will that it'll take from us? Politically speaking, don't be shy, gentlemen. This is why we pay you to come and talk to us, so don't look at each other. Let's have a discussion on it.
Sure.
Because when I say this to you, you can address this too. We have an image issue, we have a crime issue, right? I mean, is that something you all found? We have shootings, we have mall gangs, it's all over the media. That's a perception issue. That's our image right now. So we have to have the strategic plan in place to overcome even that. And I think that housing is imperative for us to have a good foundation to move forward with a solid plan. So will you be talking about those things in the weeks to come, and will we be seeing some of those strategies laid out?
Yeah, I think the short answer is that what we've tried to provide and what we've been tasked to provide is the overall analysis. And I think what you've seen tonight to kind of paint the picture from a qualitative and experience and, you know, quantitative kind of perspective, and put together a strategic framework. And so that's those 5 areas that Andy summarized our presentation with of as we look at this as you know, professionals that do this all over the Midwest and all over the country, you know, what is this data telling us? What is the, you know, what is sort of the blend of what's the data and the community and conversations that we've had telling us that we can organize for you to put together in this strategic framework. So what we've been tasked to do is provide that thorough analysis and then provide the strategic framework that we have. If we were to, as we do with many communities, kind of take this into a full-blown strategy phase, you know, we would have more conversations. We'd be talking more in depth with our stakeholders to really start to say, to zero in on here's what we saw, here's what the analysis says, here's sort of what we're seeing as the big issues. Let's dive into them in a lot more detail as developers, as service providers, as financial institutions, and start to really say, and city staff as well, right? And so get an understanding of what are we doing? What's already happening? Where are we not doing things now, or we're not doing them as well? These are all conversations that sort of jump off from the point that we've been kind of tasked to do for the city, which is kind of, like I said, that analysis and create that strategic framework. And then I think the real task is to start to understand who's doing what, where are the gaps, where are the gaps in resources, where are the gaps in services, and then start to bring in very specific programs to meet those gaps, identify the funding that's needed to make those new programs happen, and kind of continue to develop that strategic, that housing strategic plan. But that's not the point at what we've been tasked with, and so I think that is sort of what the jumping off point is from here going forward. And I don't know if, Andy, if there's anything to add to that, or no? Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think that the study shows us why we're losing to the Blue Springs, the Liberties, the Lee Summits. They're safer neighborhoods. They have newer, safer communities. They're not dealing with the homelessness that is, they might be, but it's not as visible as our city has it. And people want, like you were talking about, just simple things in their neighborhood. Sidewalks, for instance. People like to get out, they like to walk their kids. This is the new family model that we see. They take their dogs on walks, they take their kids and the dogs on walks. We lose out to communities like that because we haven't thought in this way, I think. And I think it's still doable with the older neighborhoods. But it's going to require some investment in time and some creativity to do it.
Right.
And so I worry that my greatest fear is that we've spent a lot of money and this is going to become a shelved item that collects dust. So I hope that we can actually put some teeth into this that will drive the discussion forward and see us make those strategic political strategies happen. So I'm looking forward to more dialogue, what you're talking about, and see where we come, what your conclusion in this is. The rentals are another issue too, by the way. I mean, I think you hit it on the head. We've taken a lot of local rentals, the local investors, and we're seeing a lot of out-of-state money coming in and driving, not necessarily quality rentals, but it's creating different issues for us as a city that I don't know that we've adapted to. Is your opinion that we've adapted to some of those challenges well, or did you find that we have some areas that we need to look at?
With regards to single-family rental?
And the local investor versus the out-of-state, the corporate investors. Have we adapted to that? Because that is a big thing in our community right now.
I don't know if any community has successfully addressed that challenge.
I think you've made more efforts than some, and especially on the Kansas side, and at least kind of having a landlord license and trying to find out who to contact, and that's a first step. But yes, it's a big issue that's not going away easily, and hopefully some of the companies over time see the value of investing in the homes because of the impact they have on communities.
Yeah, and I worry with inflation on the rise and wages are not. How much farther behind are we going to get in that gap to have affordable rentals available? I was talking to a young lady tonight, and she was telling me she's 19, she wants to own a home, she wants to live in independence, but she can't even afford rent with what she currently earns, and she's not sure what the future holds for her in this city down the road, but she'd really like to own a home versus rent a home at some point. So I think that, to improve affordability, we've got to look at ways to create that capital investment, create jobs in our city. I mean, this is really an important component. I hope people understand how important this study is with any future growth and investment in our city. So again, I think you all did a nice job. The only thing that I kind of wish you would have touched on more is property taxes and where that comes into play.
Okay.
So if you have an opportunity to talk about those, we know they're going up. We know they're going to be a problem, and that affects schools and disposable incomes and whatnot. So if you did you get a chance to talk about those at all?
We will in the approval draft.
Okay.
Coming up.
Thank you. All right, that's all I had.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Very briefly, fellas, first of all, appreciate this is an insane amount of data. So thank you. And it's going to take a while to digest and understand, which is something you hear all the time, I'm sure. The growth in Independence, Lee Summit, Blue Springs, and Raytown you put on that one slide, is there any correlation in the trend on that? Do you even look at that, or was it just a strict data comparison?
What do you mean by correlation in the trend?
Is there, a regional different, like why Lee Summit went down and we went down, and Blue Springs had a slight growth. Raytown is sort of,
Well, right, Raytown doesn't have much land.
no. Yeah, on the permitting, yeah.
The answer right now is no.
Okay. I'm not trying to
No, I
get you or
understand.
anything. I was just curious because, we've seen that here, obviously, Independence has driven a lot of the growth around us
Right.
for decades now. So, we know our growth is slower than some of the surrounding communities, but I was curious about that permitting, if Lee Summit, if it's slowing down in Lee Summit, but maintaining at least, or going up a tiny bit in Blue Springs, like what, maybe it's just a difference of, big subdivision somewhere or something, but,
I will say we have another slide that looks more regionally, and Blue Springs is a bit of an anomaly in that their permitting went up. Like, the county went down,
everything
The
went down
region
except for
went
Blue
down.
Springs.
most
Okay.
suburbs went down from the 20s, the aughts, to the 2010s.
Okay,
So as for why,
that's just
I'm not
generally,
sure right now.
okay. Is that gonna be included, or is that a little too far outside the range of your study?
If we have reasons that are substantiated, they'll be in this section.
Okay.
Otherwise, no.
Okay, and that's fine. Like I said, I'm just curious about that. Second question, and it's a big picture question, is this, I understand Independence is unique, every city is, but are some of these things, the aging in place, the lack of senior housing, I mean, is some of that consistent across the US or Midwest? Can you say, just in general?
Yes, the scale varies,
Right,
but in a lot of the Midwest, like culturally, we've gravitated towards single-family homes, detached single-family homes.
right,
So we haven't really built, a lot of, the homes to downsize to.
Right.
For seniors.
Right.
We haven't, 20 years ago, we didn't think of what the need might be in 20 years as a, country.
right.
So,
Well, and the baby boomers getting older and all that,
Right.
so, I totally get that. I was curious, on a very granular level, I know we all run across, folks that have lived in their house their whole life,
Right.
since it was built, 48, 58, 68, and their spouse has passed away. So I think that's probably, it's my guess, but I'm guessing that's where some of that smaller family size
That's right.
and household comes from.
yes.
Yeah, it's a combination of things, right? It's exactly what you said.
Yeah.
It's older seniors living alone.
Yep.
It's just smaller household sizes. I mean, just fewer births nationwide is a trend, and so
Yeah.
it's a combination of that, and then the aging of the population and single seniors living alone. It's all of that.
It's all of that combined, yeah. Okay. All right, fellas, really, thanks a lot. I look forward to the next version and sure appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, I had a few questions. It's a great housing study, appreciate it. A couple things that come to my mind. When you did the 1,021 a month, including utilities, what kind of number did you put on energy costs and stuff too?
About $200 a month on average for utilities.
Do you have a specific number, like a couple $100 or something like that, about where you're about at?
Yeah.
Because we do get a lot of complaints about energy cost.
Well, and that's a challenge, particularly with older housing stock that aren't insulated, that have the single pane windows, and how, weatherization programs can help just affordability, lower those utility costs. can
Yes.
lower them quite a bit.
Another one, on the affordable and workforce housing, page 4, the 30% of the new jobs requiring a high school diploma will pay $35K to $75K. Do we have the jobs to support that, or, I know it's kind of out of your, probably the thing of this, but I'm just wondering if we have that rolling here at 30%.
Yeah, these are regional job projections.
Regional, okay. Yeah.
I know that, well, a lot of people in Independence are working on attracting those stable, good-paying jobs, but could certainly have part of that. But this is based on the most current regional projections.
Okay, and my final question is, how many respondents did you survey on this and stakeholders? Is it a percentage, or you just got on there and, I mean, how did you get these surveys out? What I'm getting at.
So the survey was web-based, and we got
Just under 500, I
just
believe.
under 500 respondents. What we did was, we emailed it out to all the stakeholders, and a lot of them pushed it out to their connections. The city kind of blasted it out through public information process and social media. Culture Journey went to 10 Hispanic businesses, talked to the owners, and put up a poster where you could scan a code and take you to the survey, and actually followed up with them to see how things were going and what questions people were asking. And it was up for about 5 weeks, and normally we do 2 to 4 weeks. We just kind of gave it a little more time to get the outreach completed with those businesses.
Okay.
And we talked to, I don't have the list in front of me, I think about 30 or 40 stakeholders, both when we were here was that in August, and a lot of follow-up calls.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any more comments or
I
questions?
just
Go
had
ahead.
one more, I just remembered. So you discussed some of the data that you were using, and then you switched over to the census. How much of the census data did you use? Just on that one category, or did you pull a lot of other data from the census?
When we started, we used our data provider, Esri, makes estimates of current year and projections for 5 years, and they update it every year based on American Community Survey data from the census, from school enrollment, postal deliveries, and some other data. So we started there with the 2020 estimate, and that's what we used in the analysis up until Census 2020 results started to be issued. And so we're in the process of updating what we can from Census 2020. It's not in the report yet, but we're doing that. So I'm not sure what data sets are released yet, but we're going to make sure that information is in the report.
So I'm just looking at some of it. The breakdowns in occupation, industry, by zip codes. Did you all do any of that by zip codes for our city?
I believe we did, but I don't have it in this presentation.
No, it's okay. I think there's some really good data in here that could enhance what information you have. I mean, just looking at, Social Security incomes, supplemental security incomes, retirement incomes, just by zip code, median household incomes. This is data that could help us, as we move forward with the study as well. So I didn't know if you were pulling much of this data, or were you staying more regionally?
We pull as much as we can for Independence proper as we can. Like these maps, we go down to the census block level as much as we can. There's going to be, we have 40 or 50 of these with a lot of those different categories. A lot of those that we have produced are, again, the estimate and not census, but those will be an appendix item in the report with key ones pulled in for particular discussion.
Okay. Well, and we're going to continue to, are you going to continue to do more survey, research, discussion with the city? I mean, how are you going to come to your conclusions? You said something about you were going to take the next few weeks and finalize.
So again, at this point, I think the document that we've, the task that we've been charged with is providing the analysis and a document that pulls that analysis together and then creates the strategic framework that you've seen. I believe that there's going to be some feasibility conversation or narrative around feasibility of different types of housing and how to get different types of housing, rehab and renovation and new construction within a context of independence. You'll see some feasibility analysis that is not in the current draft. We might be fine-tuning the 20-year projections that are going to impact kind of what we see you might need in the future with some of the data that you're talking about. But this analysis is the document, and it is what we've been charged with. So at this point, this is the conversation, and I don't know that we're not tasked with and are not planning to unless we get asked, and we'd love to kind of help you have those conversations and develop that strategy with, you know, understanding, you know, at the end of the day, when you look at the strategic framework and you think about where you might go next, there are some very concrete actions that the city can take, but the city can't do it all. And there's an entire, what we call an ecosystem of housing and community development that needs to come together in order to really move the needle on housing, whether it's infill housing or new construction, and it's in, you know, and renovation of existing. All of that is, we're touching on where you might go as a city and where your partners might go to that. But it is just pointing in a future direction right now.
No, and I agree. Like I said, I think this study helps lay a foundation of the strategies that we need to develop moving forward, whether they're economics, you know, and attracting more capital, job creation, you know, thinking about the investment from, you know, the more, well, just to try to get, to bridge that gap of the divide that we have in the city. You mentioned, you know, there's a certain area in our city where we've had a lot of investment and, you know, not much return on the investment. And we need to seriously talk about these moving forward if we're serious about growing our city. So I commend you. I'm not asking you to do more. I just think, Mr. City Manager, as we talk about strategies moving forward, this study is, I think, really key if we're going to be serious about a strategy economically and bridging that gap and find out what we're doing well in one part of town, what we need to do better in this part, how we can shift some strategies from growth areas to areas that we need to focus on. And I think that the census data by zip code, there's a lot of good stuff in there, and it's locally here that's already generated. We don't have to look very far for it, but we have to have the political tummy to talk about these things if we're going to be serious about it. So I hope that we will. Like I said, I hope this doesn't sit on a shelf and collect dust. We've got a good start here, and it could be really positive for our city down the road. So well done, gentlemen. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. That moves us to staff reports.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Quick business item for this evening. As you will recall, back on November the 2nd, the voters and independents voted to increase the fire safety sales tax, raise that to 1/2 cent here in Independence. As you may also recall, when tax increment finance districts or TIF districts are established, the council votes to establish those and sets the collection rate of the various sales taxes within that. TIF districts do not automatically collect any increase in sales tax unless the city council were to vote to impose the new sales tax rate on that. So let me give you an example. The Eastland TIF, where the Cable Dahmer Event Center is at, right now, that would continue to have the fire sales tax rate at 1/4 cent unless the council voted to raise that to 1/2 cent. There are pros and cons, as with everything. On the one side, that would certainly help pay some of these TIFs off faster, but on the other hand, this would raise the sales tax rate in those areas where you're already bumping against or even exceeding 10% sales tax rate in those areas. So what we are looking for is direction from the council to put a resolution on, either to, say, nope, we want to leave the sales tax as it is and not change it in these TIF districts, or yeah, we'd like to see you go ahead and raise it in these districts. I wanted to make you aware of that, since we've had the vote passed last month by the voters and you've now certified those election results, but now we're just looking to get that direction of how you'd like to handle that.
Can we have a study session on the pros and cons? And is there a way to, I'd really like to see an analysis by finance, like where each, I know we've had a bunch of TIF stuff here before, but maybe break it down by TIF.
Yeah, what we could do is bring you a listing of what the present sales tax rates are within each of those areas, and then what it would be raised to if you took that action, and then maybe kind of on an average purchase, what that's going to mean in terms of dollars and cents for the average consumer out there. I mean, I think as you just saw in the last presentation, there are real financial challenges for people in the community. So I think you want to be thoughtful about that. I will tell you, our TIF repayments right now didn't anticipate this, so this, we didn't calculate an extra 1/4 cent being in there or the new 1/2 cent rate. I think you can tell my recommendation is that you leave this where it is at and not adjust the sales tax rate in these specialized districts. This isn't money that would be diverted from the fire sales tax anyway, because it's going to be collected to be repaying the debt in those TIF districts. So the fire sales tax is already going to benefit through voter approval from sales at places outside of those special taxing districts. But we could go ahead and have a quick presentation here in a couple weeks just so you could see what that looks like before you give us some firm direction. We'd be happy to do that.
Is there a shot clock on this decision?
No, there's not. Just want to make sure that, but no.
I mean, it'd be good to make a decision quickly, I agree.
No, yeah.
Since we'll have the tax starting up
Yeah, here.
when is our tax starting up?
We will start seeing that imposed. Our revenue's coming in with the next batch of remittance from the state next month.
Okay, very good.
Mhm.
Okay, that's all I had.
Can I also ask?
Yes, please.
If there's a way that we can, in the session, to talk about projections? What we projected 10 years ago, 5 years ago. I'd like to see where we're underperforming. I mean, the need to raise our fire safety tax or whatever tax. If they're underperforming, we need to know. And
Correct.
we need to see, how far behind we are. And if we could include that and where we think they're going,
Sure.
that'd
Yep.
be good too.
Certainly. Thank you.
Any other comments or anything from the council? Meeting adjourned.